Something interesting is that philosophy and the Christian faith seem to be a contradiction of terms to many people. To many in our secularizing culture, the concepts of reason and logic, to them, are antithetical to believing in God. Many would have us believe that to believe in Jesus requires removing one's brain and believing with the heart alone. But that said, our faith must be one of agreement, both intellectually and emotionally. Christianity must be logically and philosophically consistent. It must be because it is based on a very real Jesus who taught very real truths, who lived a very real life, and who died a very real death, and who rose again from the dead. So how does one express this amazing truth to people who think that you are a simpleton for holding fast to the faith? I have read books on both sides of the spectrum for God's existence. Many people have yet to make up their mind, partly because it's such a huge subject. But I know that both sides can at least make a good argument for their case. But I also think that Christianity can give us a better picture when it comes to questions about things like the soul and free will. I would have to grant that Christianity can make its case more persuasively. If looked into, Christian theism has so much explanatory power to everything from the existence of life or of the universe to what it says about human nature. But here's the thing. It's often not so much the philosophical points or the scientific data that prevents people from believing, because those things have been explored infinitely and make strong, if not the strongest arguments about the questions of life. It can often be the Bible itself. How can we explain the passages where we read, say, the miracles that are performed in the Bible, or things like the casting out of demons, that's pretty uncomfortable, or the miraculous healings that occur, but only some are healed and not others? That's really hard to accept for some people. Those are just a few small examples. I've seen it before, and it might be actually quite common, but people will constantly throw up those haphazard, kind of lazy objections to Christianity, usually about something in the Bible, probably all of which have already had a response to by at least some prominent Christian or theologian. But then rather than digging in deeper, they will then throw up another objection and another, and it usually just becomes clear that the person or persons are basically using just these cultural platitudes as an excuse not to look into the question, rather than them really wanting to know. So in these cases, it saddens me because the person is basically rejecting Christianity on the basis of lies, rather than actually being willing to look into it to see whether it's true, which shows me that deep down you actually don't really want to ask the question. You'd actually rather not know because it might then change your life and you'd have to engage with some huge implications if it were true. And you say that you're much more happier as you are. I'd much rather see people with courage to follow where truth leads. So people who are willing to read both sides and dig deep, they have an integrity that I admire. I'm always just so encouraged by the freedom and even the encouragement that the Bible gives us to examine evidence. That's not even true of every faith, or even very many faiths, but it really is true of the Christian faith and the Bible, and I find that I'm just continually coming across passages that encourage us to do that. Like where Peter writes, "Therefore with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed." It's just remarkable that that's the wording, that it doesn't reference your heart and feelings, but it says it's with minds that are alert and fully sober. So as someone like myself, who really values the life of the mind, of intellect, of intellectual ability, and did so even before I was a Christian, I'm just so thankful that Christianity and the Bible ask me to wrestle intellectually with these questions. Here's something interesting. So Quentin Smith, atheist philosopher of religion, wrote an article, and here's just a couple selections from that article. He says, "God is not dead in academia. He returned to life in the 1960s and is now alive and well in his last academic stronghold, philosophy departments. Naturalist philosophers' goal of the cultural pursuit of mainstream secularization has failed both philosophically and culturally. Given the erudite brilliance of the theistic philosophizing today, remember, this is an atheist who is writing this. He continues saying, if each naturalist philosopher were locked in a room with theists who specialize in philosophy of religion and debates ensued, he expects the most probable outcome is that a referee wanting to be a fair and objective referee would have to conclude that the theists, the believers in God, definitely had the upper hand in every single argument or debate. Well, amazing. He goes even further to say that the conclusion that follows from this is that the justification of most contemporary naturalist or atheistic views is defeated by contemporary theist arguments. I find it just amazing that those are words from a credible, respectable, prominent, intelligent atheist in the field of philosophy of religion. And so often, people are not even aware of the resurgence that's taken place in Christian philosophy. I would recommend to dig into the best Christian philosophers on this question of the existence of God. And I think as you dig into that literature, you'll be hopefully really encouraged to find just how strong the arguments for God's existence are, just as I was when I first started reading on such subjects myself. I think it's great to acknowledge the gravity of the question of should I believe? At times it can feel overwhelming to engage with, but that's because it's the most important, significant question of life. And I find it just crazy that most people not even engage with it, just totally dismissing it, you know? Right now it's super trendy to be a skeptic about everything. It's like doubt is the leading virtue, and the idea of expecting an answer to any kind of question is basically seen as naive, because then you don't have to commit yourself and it won't end up costing you anything. Abdu Murray writes in his book Saving Truth that we've blossomed into a, quote, culture of confusion. Confusion is embraced as a virtue and clarity shunned as a sin. The answers to life's questions no longer need to correspond to reality, they need only cater to our desires. It's just so interesting that people think that if you're willing to ask deep questions, like which I am, if you want to wrestle with the questions, then the assumption is that it has to mean you're a cynic. But we don't ask deep questions just for the sake of asking, but because we truly believe they are knowable. Answers that there is a knowable God, that truth is knowable, and it doesn't mean that the answers will be easy or comfortable. A fascinating statement from a theologian I heard once was that he said this: being religious means asking passionately the questions of meaning of our existence and being willing to receive answers, even if the answers hurt. But I don't think you'll regret that hurt, because the quality of life and your ability to live life to the full comes from that, and it's totally transformational. So I would just say, ask questions with great expectation. Ask them not because you think they can't be answered, but ask them because there are answers to these questions. And I get that with believing in God being such a huge subject, that could make it the most difficult type of subject to make a decision about. But it can also make it the most important subject to make a decision about. I think we need to seriously be cautious about not making up our minds just because it's a huge subject. Even holding on to agnosticism is in itself not believing in God. So with huge subject matters, yes, it's difficult to make a decision, but if you don't, you could potentially wind up missing out on something really significant. So I think that's partly why God asks us, yes, to look into the reason, the evidence, the arguments, but he also offers us to a type of experiential encounter with him as well. That's relational and that's personal. And that's a significant component of how we come to know that he's the truth as well. I like how the Bible says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Or it asks, Or it also says, Jesus stands at the door and knocks. We need to open the door relationally to let him in. It's quite tangible, concrete, experiential language, and I think that was very much a large part of my own experience. I dug into the philosophy. I saw that this seemed more likely than not that it was persuasive. But if I was really going to know God in a deep way, I was going to have to take that next step. And what I found was that the knowledge I really desired was not going to come fully from just reading philosophy or history or science or all those things, as important as they are. But that fullness of knowledge was not going to come before I made a personal commitment, but actually after I took a serious personal step towards God. Only then can one truly know who God is.